It's Saturday, July 12th, 2025, and we have two isolated risks of severe weather. One is going to be up here in the Great Lakes region in eastern Michigan, and that's also going to stretch down into the northwestern corner of Ohio. And then we have another slight risk of severe weather down here in the southwestern corner of Texas. Then we have a large marginal risk of severe weather, which spans all the way from the southern plains all the way up into the Great Lakes region of the U.S. This risk is going to be mostly a wind threat with a 15% chance of severe damaging winds in both of our slight risk areas. In both of our risk areas up here in the Great Lakes and down all the way in the southwestern corner of Texas, we could see increased probability of 65-mile-an-hour damaging winds, and in our large 5% risk of severe winds, we could see some isolated gusts eclipsing that 60-mile-an-hour mark. And then our largest hail risk is going to be confined to that southwestern corner of Texas, where we could see some hail greater than 1 inch all the way up to 1.5 inches in diameter. Then in our large 5% risk, which spans all the way from the southern plains all the way up into the Great Lakes region, anywhere in this area we could see some isolated hail in excess of 1/2 inch in diameter. Then our tornado risk is going to be confined to the northeastern corner of Michigan with a 2% chance of tornadoes. So the possibility of a weak, short-lived tornado is definitely going to be something to look out for up here in northeastern Michigan. And our flood risk is going to be pretty widespread today. We have a large slight risk of flooding down here in most of Texas and most of Oklahoma, and even stretches back into eastern New Mexico. And anywhere in here, we could see some swaths of rain anywhere from 2 to 4 inches. And then in our marginal risk, which spans all the way from the southern plains all the way up into the Great Lakes region, we could see widespread areas receiving 1 to 2 inches of rain. And that same thing goes for our marginal risk area of flooding, which stretches from the Carolinas all the way up into the northeast. Here's a more visual look on where most of that rainfall will be today. And we can see that a lot of it is actually going to be up here in Oklahoma and the northern part of Texas. We can actually see a large swath of Oklahoma receiving anywhere between 2 to 4.5 inches of rain today. And this is all going to start around midday. And then back in Texas, the largest amount of precipitation looks like it's going to come in the night hours, where we actually see a couple of isolated corridors back here in central Texas, which could see anywhere from 2 to 3 inches of rain. And then we see a lot of little blotches, which indicate 1 to 2 inches of rain. But it does appear that as we move forward into Sunday morning, we could see a very isolated increased area of rain back up here along the Oklahoma and Texas border, with some spots even indicating upwards of 5 inches of rain up here. So that is where a flash flood risk could certainly evolve. And then also back here, just west of San Antonio, is another place where we could see some isolated areas receiving upwards of 5 inches of rain as well. So 2 areas to look out for tonight and into Sunday morning. Then for our temperatures across the country, we're actually going to see a big pattern shift. We were seeing a lot of above average temperatures up here in the plains, but it looks like there's going to be a complete flip-flop where it's going to be below average temperatures for pretty much the entire plains, excluding the southern point of Texas, which is still going to be very hot in the high 90s. But up here in most of the plains, it's going to be low 80s to mid 80s, and pretty much everywhere else. So in the eastern U.S., we are going to start to see some above average temperatures today, creeping up into the mid 80s. And then back down here in the southeast, we're going to have a high pressure system, which is going to continue to persist and bring some warm temperatures down here, anywhere from the mid to high 90s. And back out here out west, it is going to be very hot, with anywhere between the low to high 90s being possible, and an increased probability of some super hot temperatures up here in Washington, which has actually been seeing some high 80s recently, but it now looks like high 90s could even be possible up here as well. Here's our simulated reflectivity from our southern plains risk area, and what we're going to see are a couple of things. One is going to be a mesoscale convective system, or remnants of a mesoscale convective system, which are going to push into Oklahoma as we go later into the day, and it's actually going to redevelop along a cold front, bringing some storms. Then back down here in our upper plains convergence zone in western Texas, we're going to see a cluster of storms around daybreak, which is going to be helped to initiated by the low level jet. And this looks to be mostly a rainmaker, which could bring some gusts that would be strong but wouldn't really be severe. And it looks like we're going to start to see some organized storms around right before midday up here in Oklahoma, which actually isn't in that slight risk area. Our slight risk area is in western Texas, but I do think we could possibly see a slight risk upgrade for up here in Oklahoma, with the main threat being some hail and damaging winds, mostly damaging winds, and then maybe even a spin-up tornado, as there is going to be a lot of 3 Cape out here. But it looks like the convection is going to be mostly pretty messy, and along the midday hours, we're going to see some more convection along that front, draped down by that low pressure system up there. And that could bring a couple of isolated severe storms into that I-20 corridor. And by the time we reach the late afternoon hours, we're going to possibly see a cluster of storms push through into our main risk area down here in western Texas, which would be mostly a hail and wind threat. And then our storms from earlier, which I mentioned, starting all the way in the morning hours, would persist pretty much through the entire day in our main risk area out here in western Texas. And then into the evening hours, there could be some scattered showers. With Sunday morning, we could see a pretty formidable cluster form along a front, which would push southward near I-20 in Fort Worth. Here's a view of our Midwest risk area, actually going to be in our Great Lakes region in eastern Michigan. And we're going to see in the pretty early morning hours, so around 10 a.m., we're going to see some redevelopment along the low pressure system or mesoscale convective system left behind from yesterday's powerful storms. And from this, up here in eastern Michigan, we could see an area of possible tornado potential, but it's mostly just going to be a damaging wind and very small hail threat. And it looks like these storms are going to initiate around 2 hours before midday, and then by around early afternoon, they're going to push off into Canada, and that threat in the U.S. is going to be mostly over. But another thing to note is that there's going to be a cold front draped all the way down from our mesoscale convective system back down into Oklahoma. So anywhere along this line is where we could see some isolated severe storms, bringing the threat of some damaging gusts in excess of 60 miles an hour and possibly some small hail. And the HRRR is actually predicting a cluster down here, which is going to push through central Indiana in the mid-afternoon, so that might be something to look for. But the thing to take away is that anywhere along this front has the possibility of there being some isolated severe gust. The last area we're going to look at is our southeastern, and highlighted for a lot of days in a row now, and it's just going to be the same story: a moist, unstable environment with some frontal activity in a high pressure system, bringing some organizational shear and some more moisture on its periphery, with the increased risk out here back into the Carolinas, mid-Atlantic. And with these storms, there could be some isolated severe gusts as well, and these could possibly be in excess of 60 miles an hour. Here are our 500 millibar winds, and this will show us where some of our large scale forcing will be. We'll see that we actually have two short waves pushing through the Midwest up here. One is going to be in the earlier hours and Saturday morning, possibly bringing some early morning storms. And our second one is going to pass through pretty much the same area, but it will be a tad bit more stronger and a tad bit more north. And this will peak in intensity in the afternoon hours, if not the evening hours, bringing some storms to this area. And we'll also see a bit of a short wave dipping down into Oklahoma and Texas, which is going to help with the risk of severe weather down there. And then in general, we're just going to see a lot of favorable westerly flow across some of our other risk areas, like for example the eastern seaboard, which is another reason why we could just see storms out there. And then one of the reasons for that 2% tornado risk in Michigan is going to be a large swath of 700 millibar winds moving through the region, which is one of the reasons why that threat is increased, although it's still pretty small and it would only be for a couple of weak short-lived spin-up tornadoes. Here is a weather sounding from our eastern Michigan risk area. In our hodograph, we have some decent curvature, but our helicity and shear in general is going to be pretty poor. Even our bulk shear is going to be pretty bad, although I wouldn't be surprised to see it closer to 30 knots because of that shortwave trough moving through. We don't really have much veering in our winds, which would be bad for storm organization. We do have a decent bit of cape up here in our freezing layer, and our mid-level lapse rates are going to be quite poor, so that is the reason for that conditional risk of some hail, possibly in excess of half an inch in diameter. Our lowest cloud level would be low enough to support a tornado risk, so that's why it's slightly elevated up there. Our low-level lapse rates are going to be pretty solid, which would be supportive of some severe gusts. Then we just have a generally very moist environment with a 73 dew point, and our cape is going to be 3,000 joules per kilogram, so very favorable for severe weather. And our precipitable water is going to be 1.82. Our downdraft cape is going to be 1,000. Then our 3 cape is going to be 139, which is just good for general severe weather formation, but it will also help to increase that tornado threat. Here's a weather sounding from our southwestern Texas risk area, and we can see that our shear isn't going to be super favorable, but because it is going to be near a high pressure system, there is a possibility of there being some isolated areas of more bulk shear, but it looks like the main or average amount out there is going to be about 20 knots, which would not be super good for these storms. Our veering and our winds is really not going to be there at all. But if we do get some storms, they're going to be high based, which would help to support that wind threat. Our low level lapse rates are going to be very conducive for some strong severe winds. We also have decent lapse rates at 8.3 Celsius, decreasing per kilometer. And then we have some Cape up here near our freezing level, which would support that threat for some hail, possibly in excess of 1 to 1.5 inches in diameter. We have a generally moist environment out here at say 65 dew point and a pretty unstable environment at around 3,600 joules per kilogram of Cape. And our precipitable waters is going to be 1.58, and our downdraft Cape is going to be nearing 1,300. So it looks like the main threat out here in southwestern Texas would be some hail and strong gusts from some high-based supercells. The last weather sounding is going to be up here in our Oklahoma risk area near that remnant mesoscale convective system low. Our photograph doesn't really look super special, and our shear is going to be pretty lackluster, but we do have some veering in our winds, which could help to organize a couple of storms. We also have quite a bit of Cape up here near our freezing level, and even though our mid-level lapse rates are going to be quite poor because of all that Cape, we could see possibly some hail in excess of 1/2 inch in diameter. We also have a very moist environment along with quite a bit of Cape nearing 4,000 joules per kilogram, so very favorable for severe weather. And then our low level lapse rates aren't going to be bad at all, so that could increase that threat of some severe winds. And our lowest cloud level is actually going to be low enough to possibly support the threat of a weak spin up tornado, along with a very high amount of 3 Cape around 200. So I'm not going to rule out the threat of a weak spin up tornado today here in Oklahoma. And then our precipitable water is going to be about 1.8 inches. Then our downdraft Cape is going to be 1,200. So another reason why some severe winds could be realized up here in Oklahoma. And just anywhere along that cold front north of our Oklahoma risk area, our 3 Cape is going to be just very high along that. So that's one of the reasons why there is the possibility of severe storms anywhere along that cold front from Oklahoma all the way up into the Great Lakes region.